Let me ask you something. Why did European nobles wear those massive, ridiculous wigs? It wasn't fashion. It wasn't tradition. And it definitely wasn't choice. It was syphilis. Behind those powdered curls and white makeup were bald heads, rotting skin, and a disease so terrifying that catching it meant you were already halfway dead. Before antibiotics existed, syphilis didn't just kill people. It erased their faces, their hair, their eyesight, their sanity. And here's the insane part. What started as a way for sick nobles to hide their symptoms slowly became a status symbol. Healthy aristocrats began wearing wigs just to look powerful. The poor copied them. They stole them. Some even stole wigs from infected people, which meant the disease spread faster. Much faster. This one illness didn't just reshape bodies. It reshaped fashion, makeup, perfume, and even social class itself. And it all began with one voyage across the Atlantic. One continent colliding with another. And a disease that haunted Europe for 500 years. This is the story of how syphilis accidentally built modern Europe. Stay with me. Nowadays, our medical technology is sufficiently advanced that syphilis can be cured before it reaches the third stage. However, in Europe at that time, especially before penicillin was invented, it was a deadly disease. Once infected with syphilis, it was like stepping one foot into hell, with nothing left but waiting for death. Initially, only strange red spots appeared on the skin. Before long, they would rapidly spread and ulcerate across the skin, emitting a nauseating stench. Soon, the entire body became covered in dense rashes, causing unbearable itching and excruciating pain. Each touch felt like being stabbed by thousands of needles. As the disease worsened, vision blurred until complete blindness set in, and the mind began to unravel, descending into either madness or dementia. Speaking of blindness and mental disorder, did Beethoven and Nietzsche come to mind? Indeed, they were both victims of tertiary syphilis. Hair loss was merely the mildest of these complications, yet it proved profoundly embarrassing in public, particularly for those royal nobles and wealthy merchants who prided themselves on elegance. Appearing in public with a bald head as shiny as a boiled egg was utterly humiliating. Here's a true story. King Louis XIV of France began losing his hair at a young age. What should have been a head radiating dignity and solemnity instead resembled a 1,000-watt LED spotlight from afar, illuminating the entire land of France. The sight was utterly embarrassing for the public. Fearing prematurely becoming a greasy middle-aged man, he waved his hand and hired 48 artisans to meticulously craft wigs from the long hair of animal heads and tails. These wigs were not only exquisitely crafted with intricate patterns but also flowed gracefully with every step. Before long, they became a fashion essential for both men and women at court. His cousin, King Charles II of England, long exiled in France, emulated this trend. Decades later, he brought the custom back to England, where British nobility, including judges, followed suit. Thus, wigs became standard attire for European aristocracy. Beyond hair loss, syphilis caused facial ulcers. Nobles, who valued their appearance above all, began applying copious amounts of deathly pale foundation to conceal the disease's skin lesions, thus giving birth to foundation makeup. This syphilis epidemic spurred new industries. Whatever the nobility desired, the people produced. To meet their demand for concealing imperfections, the wig and foundation industries flourished, becoming universally coveted fashion items. Limited by the technology of the time, wigs made from horsehair emitted a foul odor, and were prone to harboring lice when worn for extended periods. This led to the development of various scented powders. This unintended consequence inadvertently spurred the birth of the perfume industry, marking the dawn of Europe's modern cosmetics sector. Another intriguing detail. Peter Burke, a leading scholar of European history and culture, noted in his work on early modern European popular culture that the poor desperately yearned to blend into the upper classes, driven by an intense desire to break through social barriers. Regardless of their financial means, they not only bought wigs but also stole expensive clothing, mimicking aristocratic manners and speech. Even when they couldn't afford it, they puffed themselves up to appear wealthy. The result: syphilis, once the exclusive disease of the aristocracy, entered the homes of ordinary people. It was like opening Pandora's box, and from then on, it spread uncontrollably. Behind this wave of frenzied imitation lay a greater crisis: the unchecked spread of syphilis. Yet all of this traces back to Columbus's voyage that changed Europe's destiny. Some theories suggest that Columbus brought syphilis back from the Americas. While the origins of syphilis remain debated, European mainstream opinion links it to Columbus' voyage. In 1493, Columbus and his crew returned to Spain from the Americas, bringing not only gold, women, and slaves plundered from the New World, but also viruses, among them syphilis, which would inflict the deepest damage on Europe. It's important to understand that for syphilis to run rampant in a country, two conditions must be met. First, the presence of numerous brothels catering to insatiable demand, and second, the formation of a social network connecting these patrons to Europe's upper-class court nobility. Initially, syphilis circulated primarily within this elite circle. The first European nation to fulfill both conditions was Italy. Renaissance Italy was a haven for sexual transgression, where rape, adultery, and incest were commonplace. Before Columbus' voyages, to curb the widespread practice of sodomy and homosexuality, the Pope, cardinals, and Italian city governments adopted a strategy of fighting poison with poison, openly encouraging prostitution. Their reasoning was this: since prostitution, extramarital affairs, adultery, homosexuality, pedophilia, and bestiality were already rampant, why not choose the relatively lesser evil among these vices to replace the others and legalize it? Thus, in 1403, the Florentine government established a state-run institution. It was precisely this direct state involvement that paved the way for the subsequent moral collapse, culminating in Italy's syphilis epidemic contributing to France's defeat in war. In 1495, French forces invaded the Kingdom of Naples in Italy. Facing an army of 18,000 knights, 20,000 infantrymen, and 500 prostitutes, Naples initially surrendered without resistance. Yet the French army proved insatiably greedy, engaging in rampant looting and rape. This provoked fierce local resistance, driving the French out within a week. The conflict ended in French defeat. As mercenaries from various nations disbanded and returned home, they carried syphilis across Europe and eventually around the world. Syphilis first swept through Italy, then France and Germany. Within a mere decade, this Pandora's box from the Americas blossomed across Europe. Now, guess what bizarre measures the nobility devised to protect their wigs while the poor stole and plundered them? European nobles, each sporting wigs and thick layers of powder, privately embraced sexual freedom as a privilege, treating the transmission of knowledge like a game of musical chairs. When Columbus, Europe's first influencer, brought back spring's gift package from the New World, this game spiraled into collective disaster. The entire continent became a raucous party for braggarts, From royalty to commoners, no one escaped. Happiness came too fast, like a tornado, sweeping everyone into its path. Faced with this sudden epidemic, the entire continent plunged into unprecedented panic. Driven by the will to survive, Europeans launched an extraordinary self-rescue campaign, deploying every social media trend, wellness article, and keyboard warriors, scientific, remedy imaginable. Let's explore these jaw-dropping methods devised to combat syphilis. First up, the mercury regimen, a boon for syphilis sufferers. A popular European saying at the time went, "Spend one night with a goddess, spend a lifetime with mercury." By 1497, mercury had transformed into a miracle cure, widely used to treat syphilis. Mercury's widespread adoption was linked to the alchemist Paracelsus, whose advocacy made mercury therapy the mainstream treatment for syphilis. This was further bolstered by Arab practices of using mercury to treat leprosy and scabies, all three conditions sharing symptoms like skin lesions, rashes, and varying degrees of itching. People at the time perceived syphilis as similar to these conditions, leading to its widespread application. Mercury ointments emitted a distinctive odor and left blue marks on the skin. Consequently, hospitals were filled with numerous blue people. Patients would glow blue after applying the ointment, and a whiff revealed a scent reminiscent of roasted potatoes. Even more brutal was the mercury sauna. Think of it as a spa treatment. Patients were placed naked inside a box filled with liquid mercury. A hole at the top allowed their heads to protrude, while beneath their buttocks sat a cauldron. This cauldron contained a mixture of herbs and mercury. When brought to a boil, the mercury vaporized, allowing patients to inhale the mercury fumes freely. This upgraded mercury treatment caused patients to drool profusely, roughly the equivalent of 3 bottles. In plain terms, it meant squatting in this chicken coop for a day, supposedly detoxifying the equivalent of 5 bottles of cola. People back then believed the drooling signaled effective toxin expulsion. This wildly exaggerated mercury's antibacterial effects while completely ignoring its lethal toxicity. Patients suffered severe poisoning, leading to horrifying symptoms like tooth loss, facial ulcers, and mental derangement, a veritable test of human stupidity. By the 16th century, Europeans were still suffering terribly from syphilis. As the guinea pigs gradually realized mercury therapy was largely ineffective, a new miracle cure emerged, the so-called syphilis-killing star, the wound-healing wood. Suddenly elevated to divine status, it became a phenomenon-level panacea. This wood, originating from the Americas, was heavy and hard, sinking straight to the bottom of a basin when dropped into water. While seemingly unremarkable, people firmly believed that God provided cures in the very places where diseases originated. Syphilis originated in the Americas, and so did the yucca tree. This perfect match seemed like a divine gift, thus began a farce. Merchants seized the opportunity to hype it up, touting the wood as a miracle cure for syphilis. They even enlisted the endorsement of Ulrich von Hutten, the knight who was the internet celebrity of the time. Advertisements flooded the market, proclaiming, "Take this wood, and syphilis won't stand a chance." Wealthy rushed to mix syphilis-curing wood into cocktails, as if drinking not mere liquor but the elixir of eternal life. The poor were no less fervent, scouring for wood shavings to boil, ingest, or apply externally, devoutly performing sacred healing rituals, convinced they could escape syphilis's clutches. Having just tortured themselves to death with toxic mercury, they now blindly embraced these baseless miracle cures. They called mercury poisonous, yet in their terror of syphilis, they preferred to believe in elusive miracles rather than confront medicine's limitations. They regarded the Yuchengmu as God's prescription, believing it could penetrate areas inaccessible to mercury. Actual effectiveness. It served no purpose beyond lining merchants' pockets. This so-called divine remedy exploited human frailty. People are perpetually drawn to things that sound wonderful yet prove utterly useless. Compared to other treatments, Yuchengmu was actually one of the milder therapies. By the 18th century, alchemists had perfected mercury-dosing techniques, transforming it into blue pills. Patients no longer needed topical applications or mercury baths, but the efficacy remained unchanged. It was like feeding a patient sugar while they continued their descent toward death. Hopping these blue pills would restore their former vigor. Patients were met with a harsh reality. Soon they sensed something was terribly wrong. A metallic taste filled their mouths, saliva flowed uncontrollably, teeth began falling out one by one, and hands shook like they had Parkinson's disease. At mealtimes, cutlery seemed possessed, clattering wildly against plates. What should have been a peaceful meal instantly became a scene of utter social humiliation. Over time, their bodies rotted from head to toe. They foamed at the mouth, became severely dehydrated, and wasted away into walking skeletons. Mercury, no matter its form, remains mercury. Long-term use, once past a critical threshold, doesn't lead to virility. It sends you straight to meet your maker. Legend has it that President Lincoln was suspected of having syphilis due to his long-term use of this drug, and he exhibited symptoms of poisoning in his later years. However, this remains unconfirmed, lacking conclusive academic evidence. The official account states Lincoln suffered from depression and discontinued the medication after becoming president. The bitter lessons of the blue pill had barely faded when, in the desperation to combat syphilis, people devised even more extreme methods. The 19th century industrial revolution led to masses working in factories, driving syphilis to new heights. In their desperation, they turned to ancient wisdom, applying a cautery iron, originally used for hemorrhoids, directly to the bodies of syphilis patients. This practice became known as the precursor to fire therapy. The instant the branding iron touched flesh, pus erupted from the skin under intense heat, billowing white smoke and releasing a nauseating, burnt odor. When the iron was finally lifted, the sight was horrifying. The patient's skin lay in large, torn patches, as if ripped from cloth, creating open wounds that became breeding grounds for bacteria. Many patients succumbed to infection from such wounds, leaving this world forever. Even more terrifying was the belief that having sex with a healthy virgin could expel syphilis from the body, leading to countless children being subjected to this cruelty and infected as a result. To this day, such absurd practices persist. On May 22, 2000, the San Francisco Chronicle reported a rising number of child rapes in South Africa, partly because the government failed to debunk a terrifying myth that men could cure AIDS by having sex with virgins. Syphilis causes redness and fever on the body. Masters of bodily fluid balance believed this was caused by an excess of blood. So what was the solution? Simple: bloodletting. Besides using small knives to make incisions, they also employed water suffocation. Leeches possessed anesthetic properties, making them pioneers in anesthesiology. Meticulous practitioners would thread leeches' tails to prevent them from burrowing into patients. Multiple leeches were required per treatment. In France, one hardcore physician encountered an equally hardcore patient, ultimately suspending 30 leeches from his testicles. Such attentive care proved irresistible once the patient was anesthetized. The most iconic case involves Flaubert. This story begins with his father. Flaubert's dad was a renowned surgeon in Rouen, France. As his son, Flaubert felt duty-bound to sacrifice his young body for medical progress. He underwent bloodletting and intestinal purging, as Flaubert himself recounted. I underwent enemas and bloodletting. They treated me with leeches and forbade me fine food and drink. I was a dead man. Yet the leeches suffered worse than Flaubert. By then, France's waterways had been drained of them to extinction, yet they still failed to cure Europe's syphilis epidemic. In the early 20th century, British bacteriologist Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. During World War II, armies carried this invaluable substance, even recycling it from urine. The 500-year scourge of syphilis in Europe finally came to an end. For a long time afterward, advertisements for syphilis treatments could only be found plastered on utility poles.